she worked with a lot of African American women in the South who had been raped by white men by helping them get connected with legal counsel to try to bring their cases to court. Most of these court battles failed, unfortunately. But Rosa Parks has become, along with Martin Luther King Jr., to be seen as an icon of nonviolent resistance among civil rights activists, when I would argue that that's really inaccurate. That's historically inaccurate. To think of civil rights, the long civil rights movement, as being primarily interested in so-called nonviolent resistance to white supremacy obscures the extent to which there were multiple people who made possible the successes of civil rights movements for black rights and black safety and black citizenship. So, like, for instance, the Montgomery bus boycott, which ended up being a successful way to force the integration of the Montgomery bus system, would likely not have succeeded if it had not been for the participation of armed former military personnel who helped drive the vehicles that would take African American citizens to their jobs, to the grocery store, wherever they needed to go, so that they could still get around the city safely, even amidst violent white supremacist backlash. So there would be former military professionals driving the cars, and they would also have guns with them, so that the white supremacists who were resisting the boycott would actually see these armed men and retreat and not try to hassle the folks who were boycotting the racist public transportation. So many, there's a lot of, there's an excellent book by Charles Cobb called This Nonviolent Stuff Could Get You Killed, which essentially talks about the extent to which armed black activists, especially in the South, helped protect the civil rights activists that made possible all these changes and transformations of our political culture during the middle of the 20th century. So we tend to want to celebrate civil rights as being completely nonviolent, but in reality, there were armed African American activists that helped make all of these civil rights gains possible.
Now, Caroline, coming back to the present, essentially, Illinois overturned its ban on concealed carry in 2013. So Since then, who's gotten concealed carry permits, and are these the people who most likely need guns for self-defense? And has there been a racially skewed process for granting these?
Yes, this is really fascinating. Actually, Illinois was the last state in the union to allow civilian concealed carry. So Illinois began offering the opportunity for civilians to apply for concealed carry permits starting in 2014. The problem is in Illinois is that on one hand, it's a good thing that you need training for a concealed carry permit. Like, it makes sense that you need to learn how to use a firearm safely before you can carry it around on your person in public spaces. However, the problem is the cost of the permit is somewhat prohibitive. It's expensive. It's costly. The other thing that's expensive is to obtain your practice, the necessary hours of practice in gun safety, target practice, etc. that is a very costly thing. It's also logistically complicated. Many of the gun ranges where you're authorized to practice and to get the necessary hours of training you need are in spaces that are difficult to access if you live in, say, urban areas. You're not allowed to carry a gun with you unless you have your concealed carry permit on public transportation. So how are you actually supposed to get to these gun ranges if you live really far away and you don't have your own car? So first and foremost, the licensing processes tend to favor people with a lot of money and a lot of time and their own cars and their own transportation, et cetera. Also, there were some studies done just in the wake of Illinois concealed carry in 2014 that suggest that African American applications for permits were being denied, and furthermore that African American applicants were not being told why they were being denied, in juxtaposition to white applicants who were being granted licenses without any question, some of whom even had some criminal backgrounds. So this is a really fascinating case of how concealed carry permits are subject to all kinds of exclusions, financial, of course, logistical, but also that the process by which these licenses are being granted is not transparent. It's being done by law enforcement, predominantly white law enforcement, and they're not really giving answers as to why certain applicants are being denied when they have, no criminal record or anything like that. So, yeah, certainly in Illinois, there have been allegations that African American requests for permits are being denied specifically because they're coming from Black people. So I'm not sure what's happening with that at this point, but it does shine a light on the extent to which access to concealed carry isn't exactly universal or universally available to all citizens equally.
So, Caroline, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that you want to make sure to get across that we haven't talked about, or let me just leave it at that.
Well, yeah, just from having listened to some of your episodes, I think one thing I'd want people to think about is there have been many folks in gun violence prevention advocacy who have tried to focus on the extent to which gun violence is a public health crisis. I would just want to add to that the entire ideology of lethal self-defense as being somehow a natural or universal right is also a part of this public health crisis, because I think for many Americans, we hold tightly to the belief that everybody has a right, maybe even an obligation, to defend themselves with lethal violence if they're attacked. And yet, when you really look at our history and when you look at our contemporary cases of people trying to protect themselves, we have to recognize that there's nothing universal at all about lethal self-defense. So I think that would be the big takeaway.
Well, thank you so much for being so incredibly generous with your time. This has been fascinating today and the other day. Is there anyone else, given what all we've talked about, is there anyone else you would suggest I reach out to? I mean, I have a long list of people I'm talking to, but is there anyone who pops out in your brain as like, oh gosh, you should definitely talk to?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. I'm glad you asked. Have you followed this woman named Nisi X in Texas?
No.
Okay, this lady, I don't know her full name. I just know if you look her up, Nisi X is a Black woman who but she leads the Black Women's Defense League, and it's in Texas. And it's really